brand spanking new Raspberry Pi 4 has been out for a few months now, so maybe not so new, however I want to put it through its paces. Specifically, can this thing really replace a desktop computer? Now that might sound a bit silly. Of course it can't replace a desktop computer, it's a Raspberry Pi. However, when it was released, that's exactly what it promised to do. I took this image from the Pi website at launch. Desktop PC replacement. They're pretty clear, however, now it's just marketed as a desktop PC and not specifically a replacement. Whether that subtle change in wording means anything at all, I'll leave that up to you. But anyway, it's being sold as a desktop computer, so I want to evaluate it as such. Now let's be clear, I'm not going to be stress testing this thing. A typical desktop doesn't need to render 8K footage in real time. What I want to know is, can I get through a day of work, plus all the procrastination that encompasses, on a Pi? Maltronics.com is where you can find the latest of hacker hardware, from Wi-Fi deauthors to Arduino keystroke injectors, Wi-Fi keyloggers, and USB protectors. It is run by myself, so do give it 2 minutes of your time. You're guaranteed to like our tech. Maltronics.com, link is in the description. The Pi 4 is available in 1, 2, and 4GB RAM options. I'll be using the 4GB here because I want to give the Pi the best possible shot. Though before I could even get the Pi powered, I ran into an issue. The Pi 4 uses USB-C for power, okay, though my Type-C MacBook cable just wouldn't work with it at all. Well, as it turns out, this isn't actually Apple's fault for once. The Raspberry Pi Foundation actually screwed up the Type-C implementation, messing up on the resistors compliant to USB-C is meant to have. This means specifically E-marked cables just won't work, so I had to buy another. Oh, and by the way, don't assume you'll have a power supply capable of powering the new Pi. This thing is pretty power hungry and will require a solid 3A power supply, so your iPhone charger just isn't going to cut it like it might with a Pi Zero. Speaking of cables, we all love to complain about change, and yes, even I was agitated, furious in fact, for a good 30 seconds when I learned that the new Pi would now only use micro HDMI instead of a full-fat connector. The cheek of it. However, these cables are pretty cheap, and the connector on the board is built pretty sturdily, so I wasn't afraid to give it a little stress test, a little tug, as I bought another Pi as a backup. The new Raspbian release is called Buster for some reason.
It's Buster!
I'm not quite sure why they chose to name the new Raspbian OS as if it were a mediocre dog. But anyway, let's hope it performs better than it sounds. Once up and running, the first thing I did was run an upgrade, and damn did this thing get hot. I could barely keep my finger on the processor for more than a couple of seconds without fearing third-degree burns. If you want to use this thing for anything other than a desktop ornament, you better get some kind of cooling solution to prevent thermal throttling, which kicks in at about 80 degrees. Boot up was pretty snappy, a mere 20 seconds. I was curious to see what kind of Wi-Fi speeds I could achieve, so I ran a quick speed test. For desktop use, these speeds are more than enough. They're great, though without trying to sound like a snob, they're a lot less than I'm able to achieve on other mobile devices on the same network on 5 GHz. This seems to be congruent with the experience of others, perhaps due to Wi-Fi sharing a bus with the USB 2 I/O, maybe a bit of a bottleneck there. There's of course many a variable that can affect Wi-Fi, though a fair compromise given there is finally a full-speed gigabit Ethernet port available if you need it on this revision of the Pi. Though as I was trying to figure out why network speeds were a little slower than I expected, it suddenly hit me. I realized I had 10 plus tabs open on a Raspberry Pi and was interneting around without a care in the world. Pretty impressive given how sluggish browsing on a Pi used to be. A lot of my workday is spent on Google Drive typing up notes for videos. Now, I'm not sure if I can call this experience on the Pi pleasant. It wasn't unusual for documents to take 10 to 20 seconds to fully load. Scrolling was a little laggy, however, it was more than usable, just not something I'd elect to use given the choice. I did try a few other browsers recommended by Magpie to make sure I wasn't just doing a de facto Chromium review, though Chromium, the browser bundle with the Pi, was the snappiest I tried. After all, it is optimized specifically for the Raspberry Pi, so that shouldn't be too surprising. Of course, each of my days comes with an unhealthy amount of procrastination, mainly in the form of YouTube, as in watching videos when I should be making them, and here's the good news. I won't be getting too much procrastination done on my Pi anytime soon. Watching videos at 1080p works fine. Sure, it stutters every now and then, there's a little screen tearing and a few dropped frames, but it's fine, not amazing. Kind of like eating cereal. It fills you up, it does the job, just without any grandeur. For an optimal experience, you're best relegating yourself to 720p here, though the Pi can play back up to 4K 60fps video as long as it's using the right codec, which YouTube isn't. Now, obviously this is a codec issue rather than a Pi just too slow issue. There are some ways around the Pi's YouTube woes, however. I see Cody recommended a lot for watching YouTube on the Pi. It's a kind of media center thing, formerly named XBMC, if you're familiar. However, IMO, a desktop PC, should be able to handle streaming video in a browser without a hitch. Anyhow, I tend to frequent Netflix, so let's give that a try. Okay, so after some Googling and trying a couple other browsers, I came to the realization that Netflix and some other streaming platforms will refuse to play ball with the Pi due to DRM issues. There are some clever, hacky ways around this, mind you. By using the curiously named Vivaldi browser along with an extension and then a user agent hack, you can get Netflix and the Pi to work in cahoots. Since we're talking about a Pi as a desktop PC here, it's worth mentioning Pis use microSD cards as their main boot drive, which is great. It's super simple to reflash an SD card if you screw something up, and easy to swap cards between Pis. However, SD cards are pretty slow, maxing out at 40 megs per second or so. This sluggishness doesn't matter too much for running DIY projects on your Pi, though for use as a desktop computer, you might want something with a little more speed and capacity. After all, waiting 5 seconds for a browser window to open gets old quick. Unfortunately, there aren't any other options at this time. On the bright side, booting via USB-attached storage is coming at some point. When? I don't know, though at some point we'll be able to boot from a USB-connected SSD. Hopefully we won't have to wait too long. So, is the new Raspberry Pi 4 a desktop replacement? Well, it can do everything a regular desktop can do, just slower. The Pi has always had a novelty factor to a certain extent. It's credit card sized, cheap, power efficient, powerful for its size, and very accessible to those wanting to get into development. However, now it can be reasonably compared to a low-end desktop computer is a pretty big deal. The Pi punches above its weight, and I'm glad now that instead of just prototyping on the Pi with another PC close at hand if I ever need to, I don't know, God forbid I need to Google something, I can now do it all on the Pi itself. But is it a desktop replacement? I think not.